everyone, this is Afternoon Live. I'm Simon McCoy. Now, Theresa May has held a meeting of the Cabinet as she begins a two-week push to convince the country and MPs to get behind her Brexit deal. The Prime Minister has warned that rejecting the agreement with Brussels would throw the country into division and uncertainty. Well, this afternoon, Mrs May will argue her case in the Commons, where she faces a tough battle to get the deal approved. Labour and the other opposition parties have promised to vote against it, and many of her own MPs are expected to join them. Our political correspondent Ian Watson has this report.
It's a really good deal for Britain? Yeah. Why do you think so? Will you get it through Parliament?
Yeah, it delivers on Brexit.
24 hours after a deal was sealed in Brussels, some cabinet ministers were upbeat that it would now be backed here in Britain. And some long-standing Leave campaigners are now giving the deal their vocal approval.
It's very important that we back the Prime Minister. She secured a good deal for Britain, and it will mean that we will be able to control our borders, we'll be in charge of immigration, we'll be outside the common fisheries policy and outside the common agriculture policy.
And that's a script that cabinet ministers are expected to stick to, that the deal delivers on the government's promises. This will be put to the test in Parliament when MPs get their say on or around the 12th of December. Behind closed doors here at Downing Street, the Cabinet is discussing the Brexit deal. Now, we know that some of them don't like it, but in public at least, they're likely to go along with it. But 86 members of Theresa May's own party have told us that they're unlikely to support her deal. Now, some of them might simply abstain rather than vote against. She has a huge job to convince them, but over the next few weeks, her secret weapon, if you like, is you.
The Prime Minister, Theresa May.
You'll be seeing a lot more of the Prime Minister on broadcast and social media. Her hope is the public will push their politicians to get on with Brexit and back her deal.
I think all MPs will be wrestling with their consciences over the next 2 weeks and thinking hard about what their constituents actually want in a situation like this.
The thing is that anything could happen if this deal doesn't get through, and that's my concern. That's why I want to back this agreement and urge all my colleagues to do the same. Thank you very much.
But we know that many Brexiteers on the Conservative backbenches have already made their minds up about the deal, and some of those who backed Remain are prepared to vote the deal down in the hope of getting a new referendum.
It needs to go back to the British people with all the information available to them, and that they have that final say, which I think increasingly they are demanding.
And Labour rejects the Prime Minister's argument that it's her deal or no deal, and are prepared to let it fall.
It's obvious she's struggling. She needs a plan B, she needs an option A, and just to march on to crash in this vote without an alternative is not good enough.
But a small number of Labour MPs haven't ruled out backing the government.
So the job of the government is to look across the chamber and find a majority of MPs who will support a deal so that we can still accept the outcome of the referendum but make sure that we leave in a way that does the least economic damage to our country.
As Westminster prepares for the festive season, if MPs do reject the Prime Minister's deal just 2 weeks before Christmas, expect the season of goodwill to be put on hold. Ian Watson, BBC News.
EFTA. I thought that was Sweden. Well, let's speak now to our Brussels reporter, Adam Fleming. And Adam, a sense of nervousness here, but I suspect there as well, because they know the battle that the Prime Minister has here in Westminster.
Yes, that also Westminster phrase, the meaningful vote, is common parlance here in Brussels now, and everyone knows the big characters on the backbenches like Jacob Rees-Mogg, and everyone will be watching to see what happens, what arguments are raised, what criticisms are made of the Prime Minister, who stands up for the deal that she negotiated here with the EU, and ultimately what the result of the meaningful vote is, which Brussels expects to take place in the week of the 10th of December. Then they're still planning, they're going full steam ahead with what happens next. There's a meeting of European Affairs Ministers tabled for the 18th of December, who will then pass the deal ratified by the British Parliament over to the European Parliament for them to ratify. So everyone is acting as if it's going to go through. You talk to people privately in the pub or over a coffee, and diplomats will speculate about the chances and the parliamentary arithmetic. But the official policy of the EU is to not speculate, not to raise what-if questions. And in fact, yesterday, none of the 27 other leaders, when they had their meeting with Theresa May, even asked her what was going to happen or even started raising the concept of any kind of plan B. And of course, as we heard 100 times yesterday from the special summit sealing the deal, as far as the EU is concerned, is closed, non-negotiable, final offer.
Adam, talk to you later. For now, Thank you very much for that. Let's talk now to the Labour MP Stephen Kinnock, who joins me now. Good afternoon.
Hello,
to you.
Good afternoon.
How big a fight has Theresa May got now?
Well, it's a huge mountain that she has to climb. Something like 90 of her own MPs have said they won't be voting for the deal. They're saying that publicly. So I think we have to assume that she is now flogging a dead horse. This deal is not going to pass. And the big question then is, where do we go from there? There are a number of options.
Well, before you come on to the options,
yeah.
let's just talk about the deal that Theresa May has offered. The EU has backed it, and Theresa May is saying, look, if you don't back this, we have no other option. She's right, isn't she?
This threat of no deal is a bluff. I sit on the Brexit Select Committee. We have had hours and hours of evidence from HMRC, from DEFRA, from the pharmaceutical industry, financial services, the farmers, you name it, automotive. They have all said our country could not absorb the shock of leaving the EU without a deal. Moreover, we would have to pass 51 pieces of primary legislation here before the 29th of March to be ready. Lots of secondary legislation as well. It is not going to happen. It's an empty threat. She's doing it for a cynical scaremongering in order to try and bounce us into backing her deal.
Well,
and it's time for Parliament to stand up and take back control.
Quite a lot of people are quite scared. I mean, you use that disparagingly, but a lot of people are thinking, gosh, we don't want that, and are frightened. And the gamble that Theresa May is taking is people are saying, look, just get on with it. Whatever it is, let's just have it.
I think we just can't allow her to bluff us into this. We've got to call her bluff. She has spent the last 2 years with a strategy that's basically been about clinging on to power. Kick the can down the road, get a kind of fudge here and a fudge there, and then Parliament will see it through. We'll just live to fight. We've had enough of that. We've got to now stand up, take back control. We've got to show that Parliament does really play an important role in this country and in our politics. We've got to stop just giving the Prime Minister a blank cheque so she can cling on to power for another week or another month.
Now let's talk about the story in The Sun this morning, which suggests that Amber Rudd and Michael Gove are prepared to join you in this Norway Plus idea. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Have you spoken to either of them?
Well, certainly we've had a lot of good conversations with MPs from right across the House. We have a group called Norway Plus.
Have you spoken to Amber Rudd or Michael Gove?
Yeah, I have had conversations with a range of colleagues.
Have you spoken? I'll keep going. Have you spoken to Amber Rudd?
Yeah, look, I've had a good conversation with Amber Rudd. Yes, absolutely. Several very good conversations with her. Of course, she was a backbencher up until very recently. She's now gone into the Cabinet.
Nothing in the last few days?
Since she's gone into the Cabinet, things, of course, changed. But what I've been very pleased to see is what she's been talking to me and others about as a backbencher is now converting into action with a very important position she has in the Cabinet. It's time for us to stop putting the party first. Let's put country first. Let's get a coalition of MPs together to have a deal which delivers on the referendum and which is the only deal that has a chance of reuniting our deeply divided country.
I've got one question left, and a lot of people are going to be saying, well, has Stephen Kinnock got the answer that has eluded everybody? So just explain what this Norway Plus deal is and how you would get it through, because your leader, Jeremy Corbyn, he'd want a general election before that was a possibility, wouldn't he?
Right, well, two things. First of all, I think the Prime Minister's deal, let's assume she's going to put it to Parliament. Let's assume then that falls, which seems to be very likely. Then there are a range of options. General election maybe, but I don't see the turkeys voting for Christmas. I would love to kick this government out, but I don't see us getting a majority for that here. People's vote possibly, but very divisive, and I really believe that Parliament needs to be taking back control here, not putting it back to the people again. I think that leaves a really clear lifeboat option, a plan B, where there's always been a parliamentary majority for this, which is a deal that sees us stay in the single market, the European Economic Area. We have a form of customs union that solves the Northern Ireland border issue. We leave the EU, but we keep that really close economic relationship, and it gives us far more power and sovereignty than Theresa May's deal, because you have the EFTA court, you have the EFTA surveillance authority, you have a whole range of institutions.
But you're still paying.
We would plug into.
There's still free movement of people. It's not going to satisfy everybody by any means, is it?
So Articles 112...
And you're still paying in.
Article 112 and 113 of the EEA agreement give the opportunity for an emergency break on any one of the four freedoms that underpin the single market. We would have to think very carefully about pulling that lever, but of course it would be our sovereign parliament that could make that decision. And in terms of the budget, yes, but show me a club anywhere in the world where if you want to have access to that club, you don't have to pay some kind of membership fee. It's less. Norwegians pay something like 60 60–70% per capita of what the UK currently pays, and the budget works in a very different way. So I think it's an option, it's a compromise, a strong compromise. You might not have all the people on extreme leave or extreme remain supporting it, but it's a pragmatic, sensible, bridge-building form of Brexit, and that's what the country is crying out for.
Stephen Kinnock, good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's find out what's happening inside Parliament. Let's go to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, who's in Central Lobby. And as everybody says, the numbers at the moment are very much against her.
Yeah, well, Theresa May is going to be back here yet again this afternoon at 3:30 to make a statement reporting back on the weekend and that deal that she has agreed with the European Union. Now, in the past, she's come here and there has been not that much support across the House for her plans. Now, of course, there are lots of Conservatives who do support it, but there don't seem to be enough. Today we'll be working on those numbers, of course, in the coming weeks, and she will be getting out there to get her message across. Let's discuss this a little more. I'm joined by the Conservative MP, George Freeman. Theresa May hasn't got overwhelming backing for this deal, but she is determined to go out there and sell the deal. She says to sell it to people about how it's going to impact their actual lives. She's right to do that, isn't she?
Yes, I admire her tenacity, and I think her instincts are that to position this as a deal for the British people and for the vast majority in this country who want us to get on with it and achieve what they voted for. The problem is it's contrary. People voted for different things, and many of those who voted leave want to be out of the political union but in the single market, and others want us to turn our backs and have nothing to do with Europe at all. Not very many, I don't think, but some. So it's very difficult for her, and this afternoon will be listening very carefully to hear what she says in her statement.
But the alternatives, and we were hearing there from Stephen Kinnock, a Labour MP, I know that you agree with him to some extent on the way forward, this idea of, well, whatever you want to call it, Norway Plus, EEA, EFTA. Is there really any chance of that getting support here in the House of Commons as we look at it now?
Yes, I think there is, and that's why, look, I think the Prime Minister's chances of getting her deal through are looking pretty slim when the Labour Party en bloc, the DUP en bloc, and the ERG, that's 40-50 latest count, Conservative colleagues from the Brexit camp are against. It's very difficult to see how this gets through. So I think a lot of us are having to think about Plan B. And for me, this isn't about you know, cutting and running or telling the people they were wrong, or I'm worried a second referendum wouldn't solve anything. It's about Parliament demonstrating that we're listening to the British people and we are going to put their instincts at the heart of this. And for me, EFTA achieved so much of what people wanted, to be out of the political union but in the single market. The European Free Trade Association, Free Trade Area, gives us the single market, not in a customs union, freedom to do trade deals. I think it's an attractive solution, and as you heard from Stephen Kinnock, it commands the support of people like Stephen and Caroline Flint and Frank Field. Anything that can combine the support of Dan Hannan and Douglas Carswell and Mrs Thatcher and William Hague and Stephen Kinnock and Caroline Flint and a broad coalition of us who recognise we can't fudge this. People wanted to leave the political union, but they don't want us to make them poorer, and I think EFTA is the only deal I can see that would provide that.
But how do we get to that point? I mean, at the moment, the only deal on the table is going to be Theresa May's deal. There are others, of course, pushing for another referendum, and there's Brexiteers in your own party saying, actually, the way you look at it, the clock is ticking, and if we don't have anything in place, then we go to no deal. There is still some speculation about how this could be brought before the House of Commons. How do you stop no deal happening?
Well, you're right. There's a huge amount of politics happening right now and a lot of chickens coming home to roost. Business is looking in, and I think most business people want a deal. And no deal it's too late in the day now. Unfortunately, the work wasn't done to make that a credible alternative way back. Those who say, well, we should just threaten to walk off in 3 months, realise what they're threatening, which would be chaos. And I fear also that our economic credentials as a party would be very damaged, but much more importantly, the nation would be in chaos. So I think we're in a mess. That's the truth of it. I think this is the biggest political crisis since Suez, possibly even since Irish Home Rule and the Corn Laws. This goes right to the heart of the future of this country. The current deal is problematic for a number of reasons. Principally, if we were to exercise the freedoms that it secures, we loosen the ties with the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. EFTA has the attraction that the DUP could support it. And I think it's the only chance I can see of us finding a way for Parliament to do what the people want us to do, find a deal, get it through. I fear that if we went back for a second vote, we might get the same answer, no answer, or the reverse answer, and we're right back to square one.
Thank you very much indeed. So as you can hear, a lot of uncertainty still here, but definitely the case that MPs are looking at alternatives, although, as we say, Theresa May determined to sell the deal that she has got.
Vicky, thank you very much. Plenty more from you later on. Now, in the referendum 2 years ago, Leeds was split down the middle. It voted to remain, but by one of the closest margins in the country. So what do people there make of Theresa May's deal? Our correspondent Fiona Trott has been finding out.
A chilly morning at Kirkgate Market in Leeds, but a warm response to Theresa May's message. People don't want to spend any more time arguing about Brexit.
We are fed up with arguing about it, and I think everyone's fed up about Parliament always arguing about it as well. So we're fed up, and then we're also fed up with them. So 2 times fed up.
Definitely people will be fed up.
Are you fed up?
Oh yes, I am, because it's been ages, you know, because we still don't know where we stand.
We voted out, get out. And all the people that are whinging about it, get over it. We voted to get out, just get out.
What about businesses? The Northern Powerhouse Partnership says the feeling in this region is that this deal is better than no deal.
I think the biggest fear that businesses have is of a hard Brexit, and then the reality of that would be really damaging, not just to the northern economy, but to the national economy, because key sectors like manufacturing are really important here, but they're also really important to the UK. And that's what's pushing businesses behind the Prime Minister's deal. I don't think that there's much enthusiasm for it, but for instance, when you talk to chambers of commerce like here in Western North Yorkshire, the consensus is that they would prefer that outcome because it would give them more certainty.
What does all that mean for people here in Leeds, though, at the market, who say they are noticing the price of things going up? Is there going to be prosperity for them in the future?
I think the reality of Brexit is it's a huge distraction from what we really need to do, which is to improve productivity here in the north of England. New figures released over the weekend show that we're still seeing lower levels of growth here than in London, despite the fact that that gap's closed. But sadly, a lot of that closing of the gap is currently because all of UK growth and prosperity is being held back by people being afraid of Brexit. Despite the fact that, like in cities like here in Leeds, there's great fundamentals in the economy, people aren't investing as much as they would have done if Brexit hadn't have happened.
In this corner of northern England, which voted Remain, but only just, will they get behind the deal, or do they want a people's vote?
I think it should be a people's vote, definitely. Most certainly.
You've already had the referendum, the decision's been made, you don't want another one. I think we've already had a people's vote. The decision was made, Brexit. My understanding of Brexit was we walk away from Europe and no deal in effect, we start again.
I don't trust any of the MPs, any of the government or anything, so I just really don't know.
So do you think then there should be a people's vote?
Like I said, I don't trust any of it. I don't trust any of it, so I don't know.
Here at the market, where Westminster, let alone Brussels, feels very far away, they seem to be backing the deal because they just want an end to negotiations. But will their MPs go along with that? Let's talk now about how this city might look and feel in the future with this new deal, a deal that ends the free movement of people. And joining us now is Dr. Roxana Barbulescu from Leeds University. You've studied the impact of Brexit on local communities. The stallholders behind us, for example, they say their potatoes and onions come from local farms. Likely they were picked and packed by migrant workers. What effect will this deal have on them?
First of all, Leeds is a great place to ask this question because it reflects the national average in the referendum, being slightly a Remain city over Leave. I would Leave over Remain. What I would say to that is that employers might have different experiences. Some might be very well used to immigration rules, but others who are dependent on Eastern European workers, but other European workers as well, they might have difficulties transitioning to a new model. Having said that, it will not be a full stop on Brexit Day, and this needs to be very clearly stated. There will be 2 additional years in which freedom of movement will exist as we know it today.
And the point is that it's going to be based on their skills and abilities, not where they come from, and that's going to be difficult for farmers.
There will be a combination because there will be family members of those who are already in the country that will preserve this right of freedom of movement, including dependent relatives. So, indeed.
And what about the Leeds community generally? Around 20,000 migrant workers came to this city last year. Most of them here in Leeds are from Eastern Europe. How will the city look and feel in the future, do you think?
Well, Leeds has a history of attracting migrant workers, but also diverse communities from inside the country. There is also a large international student body that will be reflected in these numbers. How it will feel, it will depend on how the immigration point system will look like after 2021.
Okay, Dr. Roxana Barbulescu, thank you very much for joining us. Some thoughts here from a very chilly Kirkgate market. Back to you, Simon.
Back at you, Fiona. Thank you very much. More from you later on. Just to let you know, there has been a lobby briefing. Just a few lines coming out from that. First of all, we're told that at the Cabinet meeting this morning, broke up a short time ago, apparently the spokesman for Theresa May said that her Cabinet colleagues congratulated the Prime Minister on securing a deal. They said that the Prime Minister believes this deal being accepted is still the best course of action, and that she has set out that other scenarios include no deal or no Brexit. She was asked specifically about the comments from Emmanuel Macron, the French President, on fishing and his comments that could be used as a lever over any backstop arrangements, and the spokesman for Theresa May says if the UK enters into a backstop, we will be outside EU fisheries policy and will be in full control of whether French fishermen enter UK waters. And a quick note that the Prime Minister is hosting a reception of business leaders and investors on Monday evening to update them on Brexit then. She has a full week ahead of her as well, including, of course, this afternoon here at the Commons. You can watch the Prime Minister addressing MPs here in the Commons. It'll be on the BBC News channel, scheduled for 3:30 this afternoon, but whenever she gets to her feet, of course, we'll bring that statement to you and the reaction to it. We'll have more on Brexit a little later, but to other news, and a British academic who was jailed on alleged spying charges in the United Arab Emirates has been freed and could be home tomorrow. Matthew Hedges was sentenced to life in prison last week. He's always protested his innocence, and his wife says she can't wait for him to come home after an experience she described as a nightmare. Richard Garpin's report contains some flash photography.
The 31-year-old PhD student, Matthew Hedges, will be able to return home to Britain as soon as formalities are completed, after spending months in prison in the United Arab Emirates. But despite pardoning him, the UAE government went on today to reinforce its message that Mr. Hedges had come to the country earlier this year to spy for the British intelligence agency MI6.
He was part-time PhD researcher, part-time businessman, but he was 100% a full-time Secret Service operative. During the investigation, Mr. Hedges confessed he was acting as an agent for a foreign intelligence service. He confirmed that he collected sensitive and classified information about the UAE.
Mr. Hedges' family deny all this, saying he came here to the UAE to research security and foreign policy issues for his PhD. The British government also dismisses the charges of spying which he faced.
Well, we've seen no evidence to support these accusations against Matthew Hedges, but today what we want to do is to thank them for the fact that they have reflected on the strong representations that we've made. We've made it very clear for a number of months now that we see no basis in these allegations. They've reflected on that, they've taken the action that they can, which means that Matthew Hedges is going to be reunited with his family.
For Mr. Hedges' wife, who'd campaigned hard for the Foreign Office to finally take action, it now seems the ordeal is over.
It's taken me by surprise, and I'm just so happy and so relieved and really incredulous that this is all happening finally. It's been an absolute nightmarish 6-7 months already, and I just can't wait to have him back.
The expectation is that the couple will be together again quite soon. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
The Ukrainian parliament is meeting to decide whether to declare martial law after Russian forces seized 3 of its navy vessels in the waters off Crimea. Moscow and Kiev are blaming each other over the incident in which a tug and 2 gunboats were captured and a number of Ukrainian crew members were injured. Both the EU and NATO have urged restraint. Our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg has the details.
Off the coast of Crimea, Russian border guards on collision course with the Ukrainian Navy. Here, the Russians target a Ukrainian tugboat. The hint is less than subtle. Get out of these waters. There was more drama to come. Later, Russian forces shot at and seized the tug and 2 other Ukrainian vessels. This appears to be an SOS from one of the Ukrainian sailors as the Russians storm his boat. A Russian replies. The Ukrainian vessels were towed to Russian-controlled Crimea. More than 20 Ukrainian servicemen have been detained. The incident took place near the Crimean Peninsula by the Kerch Strait. Russia says Ukraine's navy illegally entered Russian waters. Ukraine denies it. This was the reaction in Kiev. Death to Russia, he shouts. Protests and pyrotechnics outside the Russian embassy. Ukraine's president denounced what he called Russia's aggression. Petro Poroshenko will ask Parliament to approve martial law to defend Ukraine against Russia. Moscow is refusing to take the blame. Russia's foreign minister accused Kiev of provocations. Sergei Lavrov said Ukraine's leaders were trying to score political points ahead of elections. To some, the incident is a reminder of just how dangerous the Russia-Ukraine conflict is.
The war continues to be live, and the war could escalate any moment, while endanger the relationship between Russia and the West.
With its show of force yesterday at sea and in the sky over the Kerch Strait, Russia has sent a clear message to Ukraine: don't mess with Moscow. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Now, time for a look at the weather. Chris Fawkes joins us now from the weather studio. And when I saw you this morning, I said, have you seen these pictures of this Chinese sandstorm? And you said, seen them? We've got them.
Just for you, Simon, yes, these are they. And what we're looking at here is a wall of sand rolling in across parts of China, heading into Jiangyi City, which is in Jiangsu province. Now, this is close to one of the world's great deserts of the world, the Gobi Desert. So that's partly why we had a load of sand in the sky, reducing visibility to about 100 metres. But the other thing is actually perhaps more surprising. What we're physically looking at here is a weather front. It's a cold front. Not like we get here in the UK. There was no cloud on it, there was no rain on it, but there was a big drop in temperatures and there was a big change in wind speed and direction. When this wall of sand was picked up from the Gobi Desert, those winds accelerated up to 23 miles an hour with stronger gusts, probably to about 30 miles an hour. So it was actually a cold front that brought that sandstorm to parts of Jiangsu province. Isn't that incredible, Simon?
It was remarkable, and thank you very much for bringing those. Now, I suppose we better talk about what's happening closer to home, because, well, there is a cold front, I know that. I'm in the middle of it.
Yes, enough about all that hot air, Simon. Actually, we have got some hot air coming our way over the next few days. We've got a big change in our weather on the way. It is set to turn much milder. But before we get there, yeah, it's quite cool at the moment. Weather systems are waiting in the Atlantic, waiting to swing into the UK, and they will bring a big change to wetter and windy weather. It's also going to turn much milder as well. For the time being, though, we're into the chilly air, and we continue to see showers move into particularly eastern areas of Scotland, eastern areas of England. You see those on the radar picture. And because there's not much wind to move those showers inland, they are just sticking around those coastal areas, really, although we do have a few also pushing into southern parts of Northern Ireland. Quite chilly. Temperatures today about 6 to 8 degrees Celsius, so we are below average for the time of year. But we are going to see some changes. Now, overnight tonight, we probably see the showers turn a bit heavier, a bit more frequent in eastern Scotland, perhaps a bit of winteriness over the hills, so things could get slippery.
Temperatures down into low single figures widely, so it's a cold night, but where we keep some lengthier clear spells, yes, we're looking at the risk of some frost and perhaps a few icy stretches on untreated roads, particularly where we're seeing any showers by day. Tomorrow, big change in the weather on the way. See this band of rain working into Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England, so it is going to be a wet day out west. But also the winds are going to be changing direction, coming in from more of a southerly direction or a southwesterly. Those temperatures lift to about 12 in Plymouth, but it's still quite cold ahead of our weather front up the eastern side of England into eastern areas of Scotland with some bright weather around. But again, we're looking at some showers moving into northeastern areas of Scotland. Now, as we head into the middle part of the week, the weather's going to get much windier. We've got low pressure, tightly packed isobars targeting the UK. And this is going to be quite a windy old day for sure. Gusts of wind running up through some of the Irish Sea coast and our western hills could reach 70 miles an hour. So there is the potential of seeing some disruptive weather on. Heavy rain works across Northern Ireland into Scotland. That could also cause a few issues given how wet the weather's been recently. But as well as those wet and windy weather conditions, we have southwesterly winds. That'll be dragging in a lot of mild air. So as we look at the temperatures for Wednesday afternoon, we're looking at highs of around 15 degrees in Belfast and also 15 degrees in London. So it's a big jump upwards. It will stay windy into Thursday across the northwest of the UK, particularly strong and gusty winds in Scotland. And then as we head into the weekend, we're looking at further bouts of wet and windy weather, but the temperatures will stay on the mild side, up to about 14. That's the latest.
This is BBC News. I'm Simon McCoy at Westminster with all our latest headlines. Theresa May has begun her campaign to sell her Brexit deal. She's due to make a fresh appeal to MPs this afternoon. Although the EU supports her deal, critics argue the Prime Minister faces the biggest battle of all in the Commons. The numbers, they say, are strongly stacked against her. In other news, Matthew Hedges, the academic jailed on spying charges in the United Arab Emirates, has been freed after receiving a presidential pardon. Ukraine's parliament is to decide whether to bring in martial law after the capture of 3 of its naval vessels by Russia. Now, the man accused of murdering 2 Brighton schoolgirls 32 years ago has declined to give any further evidence during his cross-examination. Russell Bishop denies all the charges. Let's go to the Old Bailey and our correspondent there, Helena Lee. Helena.
Well, Simon, Karen Hadaway and Nicola Fellows are 2 9-year-old schoolgirls who went missing in Brighton in 1986, 32 years ago. The man on trial, 52-year-old Russell Bishop, a convicted paedophile who was convicted of trying to kill a 7-year-old girl in Brighton in 1990. Now, he had been giving evidence in his defence this morning at the Old Bailey. He has spent about an hour and a half in the witness box. There was then a break. The jury was brought back into court in the last 15 minutes or so, expecting to see Russell Bishop still in the witness box because they expected him to be cross-examined by the prosecution barrister Brian Altman QC. But he was in the dock, not in the witness box, and the judge, Mr. Justice Sweeney, turned to the jury and said to them this: "You will observe Mr. Bishop is in the dock, not in the witness box, because he has declined to give any further evidence." He went on to tell them, "I have given him time to consider that, but that is his position." The judge went on to say, "I will give you directions in due course as to how you should approach that." And he told them what that meant is that there would be no further cross-examination of Russell Bishop in the witness box, and his evidence had come to an end. And the jury has now been sent home for the afternoon because there are no more witnesses to call now until tomorrow. And earlier on this morning, Simon, Russell Bishop was asked about that attack in 1990 for which he was convicted of trying to kill a 7-year-old girl. He told the jury that he was not a paedophile. He said he did not attack the girl. He had no sexual motivation when he attacked the girl, and he told the jury, despite being convicted for trying to kill her, that he didn't try and kill that 7-year-old. And there were some tense moments when Russell Bishop appeared tense in the witness box, and at one point he objected to some of the questions being put to him by Brian Altman QC, the prosecution barrister, and at one point he asked the judge whether what he was being asked was legal, and the judge replied, "It is, and if it isn't, he would stop it. So the jury sent home this afternoon. Russell Bishop has declined to give any further evidence in his trial in his defence.
Helena Lee at the Old Bailey, thank you very much. It's time for BBC Ask This. We've been asking you for your questions on Brexit throughout the day, and our reality check correspondent Chris Morris is here with Jill Rutter from the Institute for Government, and well, you too will be trying to answer the questions. Now, Jill, can I start with you? We've had this one from Ian Mackenzie, who says, can you tell us exactly when will we be able to negotiate and implement independent trade deals with countries outside of the EU? Will it be after March 30th, 2019, or will it be only after the end of the implementation period, however long that might be?
So there's a difference between negotiating and implementing. We can negotiate during the implementation period, but we can only implement once we've left. So at the end of the transition period, the implementation period, and we don't know when that's going to be, December 2020, but remember there's this possible extension to December 2022. But the first thing that the Department for International Trade is really focusing on is not negotiating new trade deals, it's trying to make sure we can roll over all those trade deals that with about 50-odd countries that we are now benefiting from as members of the EU. So the first thing they want to do is make sure we don't lose any of those trade benefits.
And after the end of the transition period, of course, it then depends what the future trade deal we agree with the EU looks like. If it involves any kind of customs union, then we would still not be able to implement any trade deals with goods, removing tariffs on goods. Now, there are those in Downing Street and government who say, yes, but the world economy is changing, services are more and more important, the digital economy is becoming more and more important. But if you take the world as it is, most free trade deals are about goods and are about removing tariffs and non-tariff barriers on the trade in goods. And if we were in a customs union, that would still be complicated.
And just a final point on that is, if you're another country and you're debating, is it worth spending a lot of time negotiating something with the UK, but you don't know what it will be able to negotiate because it's still negotiating with the EU, then you might decide to be looking to someone else to spend your time and effort, which is quite a lot of time and effort to do these trade deals. You might decide to deprioritise the UK.
But if you're a Commonwealth country, presumably you can start negotiating.
You can start negotiating, yeah. I mean, but you cannot implement. The other point, though, it's worth bearing in mind. Everyone's worried about the backstop and the idea of temporary customs territory or customs union. That's also a big problem for the EU, because if they want to do other trade deals around the world, those third parties are going to say, well, hang on, you've got this temporary customs deal with the United Kingdom, one of the largest economies in the world, so are we negotiating with you as 27 or with you as 28 for a bit? And if the EU turned around and said, well, dunno, that complicates life for them as well.
Right. Jill. Question number 2. Yeah. This is an email from Zaki Ibrahim. If the deal passes through Parliament, will we see a revival of the economy and a rise in the pound and the FTSE?
Hard to tell, and I think I'm nicking Chris's answer here, which is if we knew, we'd be out there putting our money on shares and betting on the pound. What's really interesting is, what do the markets at the moment think is the most likely thing to happen? So in a sense, if you're saying they would be surprised by a deal going through, then you might see some positive effects on confidence. We keep hearing
certainty, don't we? Because then there would be some certainty.
There will be certainty. So if at the moment they're sort of saying we don't think it's going to go through, or we're just very uncertain, then you might expect to see some economic uplift. That's after all what the Chancellor said in his budget he did expect to happen. We will wait to see. I think I wouldn't predict that one, and things can go in either directions. One of the really odd things about the economy is that lots of other things that could happen there. So I wouldn't be banking on it.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the same. I mean, as you say, businesses keep saying we need certainty. If we're going to be able to invest, if we're going to need to make long-term plans, and if the deal goes through and you have a transition period of 21 months and possibly longer, then if you like, sort of the really big decision about what the future relationship looks like is kicked a little bit of the way down the road. So it would certainly stabilise things, but it's not just Brexit that affects the economy, of course, all other things do as well.
And it's that wretched word if, isn't it?
We've a
lot of ifs. We've been years of ifs. Anyway, question number 3. If the Brexit deal is voted down by Parliament, as seems likely, does the government have the power to impose it on the country? That's an email from Albert Brown.
I mean, the short answer is no, it doesn't. I mean, the deal as it is, the deal that Theresa May has agreed with the other 27 EU countries, under UK law, has to be ratified here by our Parliament, and then would have to be ratified also by the European Parliament.